Welcome, and bonjour. This is Louis Brantmeyer of Clever Orbits. Today, here with our other headliner,
Richard Futrell.
And we are talking about The Matrix, the first in our series of 4, where we talk about the entire Matrix trilogy, bringing new eyes to an old classic. Richard, how are you today?
Outstanding. How are you?
I am standing out. I was looking for some sort of retort there, but it's okay if you have none. So let's just get into it, shall we? This movie has been one of my favorites for a very long time. I still remember the first time I encountered it. It was Grandpa Frank, my now deceased grandfather-in-law, actually. He married my grandmother after she divorced, my grandmother on my father's side, and it was my first rated R film, right? And it was the only contribution he really made to my life, was because I was not old enough to watch rated R films when he showed it to me and my brother. And I remembered it was just awesome. Like I really enjoyed it. And then, I watched the sequels as I moved through high school, and I recall my sacraments teacher using them to illustrate Catholicism of all things, baptism specifically, which you can see.
John the Baptist.
Yes, exactly. And then right after my Landmark Forum in 2012, I fell completely in devoted love with these films and the unique beauty of their intricate and subtle depiction of the path to enlightenment. And I'll share a story about these movies that I used to excitedly, with glee, share around that time, which is that, and it may be a myth, it may be a legend, but I like to believe that it's true, and there's a lot to be gleaned hermeneutically when this view is applied to the films, which is that there are 3 courses in the Landmark core curriculum for living, it's called. There's the Landmark Forum, the Landmark Advanced Course, and the Self-Expression and Leadership Program. And each of them has a certain inflection. The first course is all about you and your life and your interpretations of reality, and freeing you of disempowering interpretations or stories or views, getting you clear that everything is empty and meaningless, and it's empty and meaningless, everything is empty and meaningless, and you can create or invent the possibility of whatever you want, which may, to those who are listening, sound a little bit like there is no spoon. So we'll mention that to start. Then the advanced course is all about an orientation towards others, the fact that who you are is not limited to this small body and brain that you think you are. It is, in fact, the impact that your words, your actions, your thoughts, and especially your speech has on the people around you in your community at varying degrees and levels of quantity. So you start with self, then you've got family, then you've got your community, then you've got the world, and we are, all of us at all time, impacting directly and indirectly our community in the world. And so that's what I saw to be the orientation of The Matrix Reloaded. And then the Matrix Revolutions, I'm mixing the metaphor here. The third course, the Self-Expression and Leadership Program, is this whole idea where you create a community project. You learn to get really good at inspiring people with possibility and having them choose for themselves to join into your possibility and contribute to it. So a lot of community projects, in fact, hundreds of thousands, have been created out of this Self-Expression and Leadership Program, as various as people like creating wells in areas where there is no water so that people can live, to like in Australia, there was a National Suicide Prevention Day. And so the idea is, and here's the story, that the Wachowski siblings did the Landmark Curriculum for Living, and their community project was the Matrix films. And in fact, each film mirrors a film in the Matrix, which is why I was making the references that I did. So when I first started doing those courses, I was watching these films obsessively over and over. And after I did the forum, I watched The Matrix, and I was like, yeah, that's just like my experience. And after I did the advanced course, I watched The Matrix Reloaded, and I was like, oh, my God, that's exactly my experience. And as I proceeded through the 3-month SELP, they literally have some of the same conversations about choice and about commitment that you see in the film, The Matrix Revolutions. So that's one hermeneutic. That's one whole sort of initiatory point of view on the Matrix films, that they are basically a text that encodes representations of certain types of experiences that you can have in the modern world that will dramatically shift and uplift and empower you in your perspective and your behavior and your experience of life. So that's all to one side. At the same time, in 2012, I encountered the Ultimate Matrix Collection, which is this series of, DVDs, of course, including the behind-the-scenes stuff, the Burly Man Chronicles, the Animatrix, all three of the films, and commentaries. Now, the commentaries that I most love are the ones specifically commissioned by the Wachowskis, namely some by Cornel West and Ken Wilber, one of the greatest race relations philosophers and one of the greatest philosophers of integral theory currently on the face of the earth. So that's one set of commentaries that actually, it doesn't flat out give you the meaning of the films, but they drop enough hints that the Wachowskis specifically wanted them to have that you sort of know what the second and third films are about. You sort of know, oh, okay, these aren't just a jumbled pile of horse shit. This is actually something with a rhyme and a reason, and the viewer has to work to figure it out. And then there's this second set of commentaries. So they say the first commentaries are by philosophers who like the film. The second commentaries are by critics who didn't like the film. And in their little blurb in the Matrix collection, they say, well, we could have done commentaries by philosophers who didn't like it, or we could have done commentaries by critics who did like it. But what we wanted was for the viewer to triangulate their own position, make up your own damn mind, the Oracle says, about the films through reviewing both sets of commentaries. So my argument as an aesthetically intentional, inflected observer and appreciator of art is that the Matrix films are not complete without the commentaries. And no film is complete without the other two films. So when viewed as a whole, there's a certain rhyme and reason that comes out of them that most people don't see, that they then dismiss the second two films for not having. So anyway, I discovered that at the same time as I discovered the Landmark curriculum and was doing that. And alongside both of those, I was reading the Tao Te Ching obsessively, and I was listening to this audio course by a Buddhist monk and science scholar who studied meditation for 50 years named Shinzen Young. And his course, which has now become a book, which is much better done than his course ever was, but it's much more intricate, much more dense, is called The Science of Enlightenment, where he takes science and applies it to the data and the experience of the experiment of meditation practiced by all the various traditions from shamanism up to modern mindfulness throughout Buddhism specifically, or with an emphasis on Buddhism. Like he talks about Sikhism and all this other stuff. And with an eye towards making it scientifically palpable as a specific theory and as a specific path and set of distinctions for what happens when people meditate. So this whole cocktail, all these different things combined in my head when I saw The Matrix 6 years ago, and it was just this revelatory experience. Moment by moment, I kept seeing more and more parts of these films that didn't make sense start to make sense. So, I mean, you don't have to read all of those things to understand it. You don't have to expose yourself necessarily to all of those things, but I will let people know my sources that I'm tapping into in order to explain the films. And in fact, my overall sort of orientation when it comes to the films is that Neo is leaving the surface consciousness of superficial everyday life where illusion is taken for reality, and he's moving through what in Buddhist perception is called the Makyo, or the realms of power, where one attains supernatural powers, psychic powers, ability to manifest things at will, like he sees when he becomes the one, or realizes himself as the one. He was always the one, right? And the whole path is towards the source of consciousness. It's a return to the Dharmakaya, the body of the absolute, the source, the unmoving source of all vibration, all energy, all matter, all being, each individual mind and each individual soul. And he reaches that when he returns and plugs himself back into the source in the Matrix Revolutions, the source of in this instance, the code for, the Matrix itself, and more specifically, by surrendering equanimously, complete equanimity, complete surrender of his concept of self, which he was still holding on to pieces of throughout the trilogy. Like he begins to see that it's pliable. He incorporates Agent Smith into himself at the end of the first film. And then throughout the second film, he's tortured by this notion that he's going to lose Trinity. So he's still attached to something personal. And by the third film, he loses Trinity. He actually lets her go this time instead of struggling to save her, as he does in the second film, at the expense of the entire human colony, I might add, or Zion. And then by the third film, he's been blinded to, normal sight. He has let go even of his ability to see and has been rewarded with his ability to see this yellow, new matrix code, which is spirit. And strangely enough, Richard, artificial intelligence is also capable of enlightenment, according to these films. Because when he goes to Machine City, and also when he looks at Agent Smith, and also when he looks at Seraph in The Matrix Reloaded, he sees this golden code. And this golden code on the commentaries is spirit, just as blue is a representation of body in the films and green is a representation for mind. So the whole trilogy is about the integration of these three parts for the individual soul, for the world at large, and it's done by Neo eventually surrendering to Agent Smith. You were right, Agent Smith. You were always right. And then he lets Agent Smith defeat him. He lets go of whatever last vestiges of himself there are, and in fact, he liberates the entire world with that last act. So anyway, that's my meta interpretation. This film itself is complete unto itself, and there's a lot to say about it typically, but that's my opening salvo. Richard, I appreciate your patience in letting me get that out, because that's,
that's
something
really
I worked
cool.
very hard on. Yeah.
This is a movie that I think both of us and many other people have thought a lot about, and it's hard to exaggerate the impact this movie has had on our culture. Just think about all the metaphors, the ways that the imagery from this movie has permeated the way people talk ever since the movie came out. I have no doubt that in 500 years, when historians and archaeologists are looking back at our time, they're going to think about this as a religious text. In terms of the impact it's had, it's been quite similar to, something like Christianity. Isn't that interesting? That's an interesting coincidence.
Yes.
So I've got a few points which are going to circle back to some of the points you were making about the relationship of mind, body, and spirit. So I feel like first time I saw this movie, I was in middle school, and there's a lot of stuff I didn't understand. And I really struggled with it, and I really struggled to understand things, and some of them I've figured out, some of them I haven't figured out. And so I think that's a good way to orient a discussion of the Matrix. Like, what is the stuff that used to be confusing and now is not confusing to me? And maybe that's confusing to some of our listeners still. And so by explaining what I figured out, I will be improving your life. So lots of small things in this movie, like why is there that weird effect with the mirror when Neo is touching the mirror? Or when that helicopter hits the side of a building, why is there this wave that propagates out as if there's a glitch in the Matrix because this helicopter hit a wall? Why would there be a glitch in the Matrix when a helicopter hit a wall, right? So
I've also got
a
curiosity, not to interrupt, but what I found especially strange is their misuse of the phrase déjà vu. Like, that's not what déjà vu means.
Well,
which I thought you would appreciate.
I mean, words don't have definite meanings, so that's okay. But so the conclusion I came to about stuff like the mirror and the wall, you have to keep in mind that what the Resistance is doing in this movie is they are hacking the Matrix. And so what that's going to appear as for someone who's still in the Matrix is really weird shit happening, right? Like a mirror that sort of moves around in a weird way, and when you touch it, it starts to go onto your skin. Like, that is part of a program that the Resistance wrote, and the program is called, How to Extract a Person from the Matrix. And it somehow, exploits a vulnerability in the way that the Matrix simulates a mirror or something. The way that the Matrix simulates a person looking at himself. That's the system that they exploit in order to pull someone out of the Matrix. Or here's another question. Why is it that they leave and enter the Matrix via phone? There's no reason that phones have to be connected to the outside world. The phones are simulated just like everything else, right? But the key thing to have in mind, yeah?
Why can't they use cell phones? Like, that didn't make any sense to me either. I mean, it's about as arbitrary, right?
So, here's the thing to keep in mind. They're hacking into the Matrix. What the key notion is an exploit. So when you're hacking a system, what you do is you look at the way the system works and you find some subsystem in it. And you say, how can I alter this subsystem or give this subsystem weird input so that it does something I want it to do, which it doesn't want to do? You find a vulnerability, and that's called an exploit. And what the hackers have done in this movie is they found an exploit in the way that the Matrix simulates telephone systems that somehow allows them to inject themselves into the Matrix, hacking into the Matrix. Like, the exploit actually involves telephones somehow. It could involve anything. It's a cinematic choice. But the fact that it's restricted to phones, I think, shows that the Wachowskis thought very deeply about, what it means to hack into a system. Because if you really were hacking into a simulation, it would be through some really specific, tiny little thing like that. Something where maybe the simulators weren't paying careful attention when they were writing the code, and they left open some vulnerabilities. So there's this notion of an exploit, and that explains a lot of the weird stuff you see. The fact that the helicopter hits the wall and causes this weird glitch, that's because the way that Neo threw the helicopter was not the way a normal person would throw a helicopter. The way he threw it was actually via this exploit that he's using to hack into the Matrix. And so it's something the Matrix wasn't ready to handle, and so it glitched out. It's a very powerful concept for explaining the movie.
So it's like when you're in MMORPG and you kind of mess up, you go off the map or something.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And people who are really good at MMORPGs will then exploit those glitches to do stuff you're not supposed to be able to do. And that's exactly what the hackers are doing when they go into the Matrix. So the second big question I always had was, how does Neo come back to life? How does he survive? And this bugged me for a while, and I thought it's like some weird supernatural thing. It doesn't make sense. This thing makes perfect sense to me now in terms of the logic of the movie. I don't know why I was ever confused. But look, so after the training program where Neo hits the ground and has blood in his mouth, Morpheus says, your mind makes it real. So when Morpheus gets shot up and killed in when Neo gets shot up and killed in the Matrix, at that point he's reached such a point, he's rejected the Matrix in such a complete way that his mind no longer makes it real. He doesn't have to die. He's not physically damaged. Like, his rejection of the Matrix is enough that his mind does not make it real anymore, and so he survives. I don't know if that was hard for other people to figure out, but it took me a long time.
Well, where does his consciousness go, though? I mean, he needs to be conscious.
He doesn't have to go in there. His brain is still in there. So your brain
like,
stays alive for quite a while after your heart stops beating.
Interesting. But there needs to be some intentional use of his consciousness in order to reactivate his body, in order to come back to life, right?
Yeah. And the really interesting thing is that what reactivates him is actually Trinity's words. Trinity's words of love.
Oh, so maybe he had a peripheral consciousness of the fact going into that fight that whatever happens, I'm not going to die, or I can't die, or something. But the real life visceral experience, right, of being shot, he needed a second to process that and to reinterpret it as not real.
And maybe at first he interpreted it as real, and then his brain is sitting in his skull dying, and he hears Trinity's voice, and he thinks, what are you doing, man? That wasn't real, right? Just wake up. And that's when he actually wakes up. And that's why it's such a powerful moment. It's like both dramatic and exciting because it involves someone coming back from the dead, so it's kind of like spooky and supernaturally interesting, and it makes perfect sense within the logic of the movie. So that's always a very exciting moment.
See, I want to add, at that moment, it was funny. I counted. Smith has shot Neo 15 times, at least. And then the way that I took it was more on a religious side and more from the mystical, that after Neo's heart stops, it is love that breathes spirit into matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like the intention and the desire. Like, there's this notion in modern New Age philosophy, and I never thought I'd be using that phrase ever, but I moved to Austin, so I'm in it. That well-being is, and actually it isn't, I wouldn't say there's anything fringe anymore to me about New Age philosophy. You know, you look at Letting Go, the book by David Hawkins, MD, PhD, and you see this scale of consciousness and love. And so the idea is that different emotions vibrate at different frequencies, and the higher frequency you are, the better. So love is up there, peace is up there, enlightenment is up there. If you're experiencing like pain or suffering, or whatnot, to engage in love is a higher form of life or a higher form of the vibration of energy. So love is continually coming from source to us, to our hearts, through our hearts, into our lives. And that may at some point sound not as robust as I'm committed to speaking philosophically, but in the context of the movie, love is always available for him to access, and she reminds him of the fact that it's there. And so that the energy of love, and beyond just the energy of love, metaphorically speaking, when her love for him, like the fact that her love caused her to speak, even if it is exactly what you were talking about, her love caused her to speak and remind him of the fact that his mind was all-powerful here. And so her love awakens him, enlivens him, and it makes love this non-trivial solution both in the story and a solution in the world at large. Like, if we open ourselves up to other people, feel them, love them, allow love through us, it's the key to a better, sort of an upgraded world, in my view. And so that was how I read that. There was more of a thematic bent.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I'm not trying to diminish from your reading. I think the genius of this movie is that it works perfectly well on a mechanistic level and a metaphorical spiritual level. And that's the whole advantage of this setup, where you have people inside a machine simulation. So like these ideas basically go back to Gnostic Christianity. And as a very quick thumbnail sketch of Gnostic Christianity for our listeners, basic idea is that the world we live in, the physical world that we experience, is not the real world. It's actually something like a prison, something like a black iron prison, created by an entity called the demiurge that wants to suck out our energy or something, or that lives off of our suffering, essentially. And the function of Jesus is to come down from some higher truth, Sophia. Jesus is the word coming from the higher truth, and to let us out of this black iron prison. So when this was a religious idea, it might have been somewhat hard to swallow. But now that we have the idea of computers simulating things, we can actually create a movie where all these metaphors play out in a way that is completely plausible, physically plausible. I think that's actually an incredible contribution of this film and this set of ideas.
That's actually really fascinating, given the implication then that all of this could be real. It brought religion.
I think that's I'd like to table that discussion for later if you want to have it, about if we actually are living in a simulation.
Oh no, I'm not necessarily aligned with Elon Musk, who,
that's a long conversation. That
very high probability. Well, I mean, not the simulation part, but rather just the idea that a lot of the religious imagery, given the fact of the Matrix being plausible, it actually makes religion more plausible in general to the scientific, skeptical, rationalist mind.
It does. This is like the first presentation of Gnostic ideas, which is actually just mechanistically plausible, it could happen. Before this, you had to invoke spirits and stuff, and now you don't. And maybe that means that when people were invoking spirits before, they were talking in a way that was actually quite coherent. And it doesn't seem coherent to us now because we're like, oh, there's no spirit. But maybe they were talking about very serious stuff. So let's see, on my list, I've got 2 more questions that I didn't understand that I now understand. One of them is a small one, and then there's a big one that I don't understand yet. So number 1 is Cypher. What's up with Cypher? It seems like Cypher is really stupid to trust the machines, right?
He trusts them
in the restaurant.
Pretty definitively.
It's pretty obvious that Agent Smith is lying. This thing is whatever you want, Mr. whatever his real last name is. I guess not his real last name, his Matrix name. But so here's the thing. I always thought Cypher was incredibly stupid, and this is like a plot hole, but it actually does make sense. Imagine that you are just so burned out and so depressed and so, sucked into the vortex of nihilism by your encounter with the real world that you are willing to die. Then from his perspective, dying isn't such a bad outcome. You might as well take a gamble and say, let the agents put you back in the Matrix and be a movie star or whatever. And, they're probably lying. But even if there's like a 0.001% chance that they're not lying, you get to experience that instead of just dying. So what it really shows is just how committed Cypher is to nihilism and suicide. The fact that, he's going to die anyway, wants to die anyway, so might as well take a gamble on this tiny percent chance that the agents aren't lying to him. And I think from that perspective, Cypher becomes an unbelievably dark character.
I took him more as a hedonist, more as a, my life sucks here, and I actually really do believe Agent Smith. And I never actually doubted Agent Smith. I thought it was more a matter of how convenient and easy it would be for them to actually honor their word and put him back in to the Matrix as a very small price to pay for getting everything that they wanted and needed.
The thing is the machines don't have any incentive to honor the deal because they say they're going to wipe his memory. So, whether they do it or not, he's not going to be thanking them. He's not going to remember anything. It's as if he's going to die anyway.
That would make a really good story if they plugged him back into the Matrix, but they did not wipe his memory.
He started getting dreams and stuff.
He starts getting dreams, or maybe he's just left with this unswerving guilt about all the people who died. Or something like that. I mean, that would be interesting.
That would be a cool, side story.
Yeah. So anyway, but you found him to be very nihilistic. I see that. I see that reading.
Yeah, well, hedonism leads to nihilism, right? So
eventually, yes. I mean, it's just
it does.
Brute repetition of certain experiences, right?
Eventually hedonism is shallow and something that only exists in the body. And it leads your spirit to die. Cypher is someone whose spirit is so dead that he's totally willing to die and just sacrifice everyone that he has ever cared about on this tiniest percent chance that he might get to enjoy being a movie star. So that's Cypher. Okay, here's the last question I've got about the Matrix. This is the one that I don't have answered yet, and I think this question actually goes right into the core of what this movie's about and the connection between mind, body, spirit. And this is a question of why is it that you get superpowers when you realize you're in the Matrix? So here's a thought experiment. Suppose I put you in a VR machine in an Oculus Rift. It's like a headset. And I hook your hands up to a controller. And suppose I actually raise you your entire life in the machine playing Mario Kart or something in the machine. So the only experience you've ever had is via this Oculus Rift headset and your controller moving around your Mario Kart. And so now somehow I convey to you the information that you're actually living in a simulation. That's not going to give you extra powers in the game. Why would that give you extra powers in the game? Right?
Your reasoning is sound so far.
So how does Neo why is it that realizing you're in the Matrix gives you power over the Matrix? It doesn't follow immediately that this has to be the case. And this is not just an issue in the Matrix. This is an issue in a lot of the way people think about all the things the Matrix is a metaphor for. The Matrix people see it as a metaphor for any system of control, social systems of norms. I'm sure the Wachowskis see it to some extent as a metaphor for gender norms that they felt they were escaping. But it's not obviously the case that when you realize you're in a system of control, that just gets you free of the system of control. Why does realizing it's fake get you out of the system? It's actually kind of frightening to imagine you realize it's fake and that doesn't give you any extra powers, right? Because then you just have no more sense of meaning and you're screwed.
Well, what's even more interesting at the outline of that question, or at the fringe of that question, is the fact that the Matrix had to be designed in order that that realization would activate the exercise of those powers. So I mean, in the context of the film, when you watch the 3 films, the protocol of the one, and it's really just a protocol, and it repeats many times. like it exists in such a way that that person, their mind and intention then has that impact. And it applies it in the Matrix. For me, it's an illustration of Gnosticism. Like, if you realize that your body is a prison, I mean, and I wouldn't actually go that far. I wouldn't say that. There were, of course, different Gnostic sects in early Christianity, and one of them was ascetic, right? Because they thought, well, the body, it doesn't matter, but let's be really careful with it because, you know, it's harmful to be in it at all, so we don't want to worsen it. And then there's this other sect that was just like, do whatever you want, drugs, have lots of sex. And I think there was some sexual license. It was like 1st or 2nd century AD. But so what I see in that is this notion of the fact that if there is a deeper reality, and you know, Richard, some of the people that I interact with these days, they are straight up like, you remember Eckankar?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so I actually chant you every day. And one of my mentors straight up talks about how there are 4 different types of bodies, and you know, that there's this other realm. There's this other realm that our soul has come down from, that once we realize the reality of everything around us, we become freed to pursue what really matters, which is advancement in enlightenment towards that realm. And to some extent, I think this film proffers something like that, or this film series proffers something like that it's better to know the truth than to be stuck in illusion, and that once you and actually this accords with the realms of power notion from earlier, which is you can take a certain angle straight down to enlightenment and connection with Source, or you can take an angle that goes through these realms of power and equips you with certain superpowers. And exploring or inquiring into or seeking after the source of consciousness enables us to express these powers and get access to them and activate them. And that improves our functionality in life, and it improves our ability to have what we want. And so it's empowering, this idea that there is a way that things are, there is a part to reality that we don't see, that once we see it, it enables us access to using our brain or our intention in a certain way. And I live my life by this. I live my life by this now, where believing in the law of attraction and knowing how the subconscious mind actually works activates a certain set of skills in creating, manifesting, having certain types of experiences that seem not to make sense when you only look at the physical material reality we occupy. It seems like there's an immaterial reality, even if it is just the substance of our own subconscious mind. It can be impacted through affirmation, visualization, declaration, such that our behavior starts to effortlessly, automatically, and spontaneously change. And Shinzen talks about meditation having this impact. And also, like, situations and circumstances in the external reality start to change. Your wish is your command. Feel free to prosper. Feeling is the secret. These are the books and resources I'd point people to explore and investigate that realm. And really, these films are exciting to me because they're like a gold mine for coaching. I mean, like, if you realize the limitations of your interpretations in your own life, namely that a spoon is a spoon, then you will start to actually be liberated from the weight that they carry. And so that it hangs together for me in a reasonable way that way.
No, it's quite intuitively true. And I think the interesting question is, like, how does it actually work out? So, like, I gave one thought experiment where it seems like it wouldn't work out that you would get superpowers by realizing the world's a simulation. But intuitively, it definitely seems like you would. And so there's basically, I have 2 explanations for why this is going to be, why that would happen. There's like a positive one and a negative one. So we'll start with the negative one, and then we'll do the positive one. The negative one is going back to this notion of an exploit. So when Neo and Trinity and, you know, the gang are in the Matrix after they've extracted Neo, they're not really there in the same way as everyone else. they're hacking the matrix and projecting themselves into the matrix. The way they're interfacing with the matrix is via an exploit in the matrix, right? And we know from the second and third movies that exploit actually came from the machines who want to do this thing with the one, where they have a one periodically every few generations so they can reboot the matrix. And so it could be that this exploit is actually designed by the machines to give you extra powers when you realize that it's a simulation, as a way of implementing the one protocol, right? And that's an incredibly dark take, because that means that all the power you get from realizing the fakeness of the world and the world of meaning that we live in is actually part of another system of control. So that's like sort of unbelievably dark, but I don't think it's the interpretation.
For all that, I think the liberation that Neo achieves at the very end of the trilogy is real.
Yeah.
I think it may actually be arguable, given the other system of control that the protocol of the one and the matrix within a matrix or whatever argument, that is, in fact, all another system of control. Like we might be liberated from certain levels of illusion and still be operating in more illusion than truth. So that's good.
Yeah, it's and really kudos to the Wachowskis for coming up with this idea of the machines having created the protocol of the one as part of another system of control in the second and third movies. It's like, not only is it philosophically cool, it's exactly the kind of thing that would happen in actual computer hacking, where like you discover there's some exploit in a system, but the exploit's actually designed by a malicious attacker to trick you into doing something. So it's incredibly cool in that way. So here's the more sort of, I think, the deeper take on why it is that realizing the falseness of the world of meaning, or the emptiness of the world of meaning, gives you superpowers. So imagine that you are this person that has spent your entire life living in an Oculus Rift, playing Mario Kart with your thumbs and your fingers on the controller. Once you realize it's fake, you might start to move parts of your body you've never moved before. Like you might start to move your arm, which you've never moved before, right? And when you move your arm, that might enable you to move the controller in a very slightly different way, a way that you never would have thought of if you hadn't realized the fakeness of your simulated reality. And that'll give you an edge over other players in the game. And for other players in the game, it'll look like you have superpowers because you're doing things that they thought were impossible, right? So basically, when you realize that the world is fake, the way that your mind interfaces with the world changes. There are a number of limitations fall away. So like you can think about the mind as like the conduit between maybe the world of spirit and the world of the body. And once you realize that the world is fake, that means that the electrical signals your brain is sending to your body are subtly different. So your mind is actually starting to hack the matrix and do things to it, which would be impossible for someone who thinks that it's real. And that's going to give you superpowers when you realize you're outside the system. You can get superpowers that way without, having a malicious exploit designed by machines. And yeah, I think that's the basic idea. What's essentially happening is that the matrix is hackable. Once you realize it's fake, then that just opens up your creativity at a cellular or a physiological level even. Like the way Neo moves, the electrical impulses moving through his body or his simulated body are no longer the kinds of impulses that a regular brain would send to a regular body. These are now the kinds of impulses that a mind who is hacking into a simulated reality sends to the simulated reality, interfacing directly with the code, just breaking through all the functions, going right inside Agent Smith and breaking his source code instead of just, fighting him as if he was another person. So I think that's it. It basically comes down to the idea of hacking. Once you're outside the system, you can see how to hack it.
I love this, and I should have anticipated getting some really great computer science stuff from you. I think this movie is very deep for computer science.
This is like my new perspective. Seeing it now was the computer science perspective, and it lines up with. This is all in perfect alignment with the physical reality of what's going on, and also with the metaphorical interpretation in terms of how to live your life. It all lines up more or less flawlessly. And that tells you something when things line up that well. That tells you that there might be some deep truths involved.
Multiple levels at once. Yeah, the polyvalence of these films. For example, you get a very eloquent depiction of the hero's journey in this first film, from Joseph Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
You get the path of the fool from the tarot very clearly. And there's a great YouTube video that illustrates that. And, that there's just this sense of, there's this sense that it's an esoteric religious text. I mean, that there's stuff there. And, so I'll start back from the beginning. There was a lot of questions and ideas that I had, and a lot of things that I realized. So at the very beginning, it thematically shows you in the very first shot when it goes into the numbers. There's this scene where you get a mass of numbers that are changing and stabilizing and then disappearing, and you travel through this number 0, and then you come back again to all of known reality. And it's like the traversing of this path to enlightenment. You look from the surface level, you go inside of it, you go through emptiness, and then you come out the other side into normal physical reality. And this is the path to enlightenment as illustrated by Shinzen Young. And so there was a question that I had, which is why a program like The Matrix has any difficulty or takes any time at all to trace a phone call, like Trinity. And what I thought about that must be especially frustrating to Agent Smith is the architect must have designed the agents to be slightly incompetent.
This is also why that they hack in through the phone system. Like there's other ways they could hack in, but they would be able to detect it immediately. But with the phone system, just for whatever reason, it's hard for them to detect that, and that's why they hack in via the phones.
So yes. And that's clearly why they're unable. But I was looking more at the side of why are the agents with all their skill? And I thought the architect must have designed them in such a way that they're not perfectly capable. They could be perfectly capable of capturing anybody who has liberated themselves from the Matrix, but they're not quite. It's like an inefficient program. And Agent Smith himself can intuitively detect his own limitations, maybe not knowing they're there in order to keep the balance of things between the resistance and the agents and keep them stuck in the Matrix. But he is definitely frustrated by them. A power like his and a mind like his being confined to the Matrix on some level, and you can see it when he's talking to Morpheus, he does not want to be there. He knows he's capable of better things. Now, his arc throughout the trilogy is kind of the inverse of Neo. Neo is the maximal affirmation of meaning through community, through discovery, through exploration, through self-knowledge, whereas Agent Smith is the denial of meaning through the multiplication of that denial. Like he eventually replicates himself onto everybody in the Matrix in order to deny the possibility of any meaning, in order to deny the possibility of any achievement. And so even liberated from the Matrix, his only concern is to annihilate Neo in the second and third films. And so that desire eventually becomes his undoing, because when he interfaces with Neo, and we'll analyze what that means later on in the Revolutions, but when he interfaces with Neo, he basically kills himself and frees the Matrix again in a deeper way. Now, the beginning where there's the scenes with the cops, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple things that I really appreciated. Since green equals mind, then the whole story could be seen as the reintegration of one soul's body, mind, and spirit through a dramatic initiation. It's like a dramaturgic kind of thing. And, one is also reminded of Deleuze and Guattari's notion of the cop in the head, capitalism and schizophrenia. And you see the policeman coming to grab Trinity, this religious meme. So it's almost like, and it's just on the edge of coherence at this point, but it's almost like the police are the internal policing mechanisms that we carry within ourselves even rob us of religious metaphors that serve us. So what did you hear in that?
I mean, I think it's definitely the case that systems of control like the Matrix play out not only within individuals and societies, but also on a physical level. So the cops that exist within the Matrix and the agents in the Matrix, you can easily see analogs of those in our own thought processes. Not all of them malicious, Sometimes the cop tells you not to punch someone, but a lot of them are malicious. And that's just the nature of control. And part of the nature of an organism is that it controls its own body. So that this kind of mechanism is always going to crop up.
Yeah, and from that same period of the film, I thought it was interesting. The whole film that you had these sunglasses on the agents, right? They're an accessory, and they clearly don't help the agents to see at night.
But the agents can see through walls.
That's
part
true.
Where they're shooting Morpheus through the wall. They're not seeing the world like normal people see the world. You're
right. You're totally right. I thought it was interesting that the police just accept that those sunglasses are normal. I mean, it is kind of strange. And then actually, I didn't realize this before. I'd always glossed over this, but the fact that Morpheus and then Neo and Trinity and then basically all of the liberated characters, when they revisit the Matrix, they are wearing sunglasses themselves because they have this heightened capacity to see and perceive the reality of what's going on. And they see through the illusion. So they're a walking metaphor for the fact that they see through the darkness into what's really going on.
And ironically, they do that by wearing sunglasses.
Ironically,
they do that by wearing sunglasses, which darken their view.
Exactly. So I like the quote, "No, Lieutenant, your men are already dead." Like there's this ominous tone, the fact at this point the viewer has very little clue what's going on. I wrote in my notes that I can't wait to show these to my children because of that line. I don't know why that line inspired that. So that was the thing. And then Trinity being a delightful badass and being a female lead for the film, that was great. She's our first protagonist. And that's not common for action films to have a female protagonist, or at least it definitely wasn't at the time. This other thing, I later noted that they transmit people into the Matrix via radio dishes. They're not directly jacked in. They're broadcast. So
they're not really there in the same way as everyone else.
Yeah, their presence in the Matrix is via wireless network. I mean, their entire experience of embodiment within the Matrix is Wi-Fi. I mean, it's so fascinating to me.
So that raises the question, if you're plugged in the Matrix like a normal person and you realize it's a simulation, will you then have superpowers, or do you have to be, hacking in via radio to get the superpowers?
Big question.
I think in the Animatrix, there's an episode where someone just realizes a priori that they're in a simulation. So we'll flag that for later.
Yeah, we can reintegrate that. I think it's Kid's Story, I think is the name of it. And there is some more to say about the nature of the personality. It's interesting that at this point in the development of humans, and it reminded me a lot of Dollhouse, which is this show where the personality is reduced to a series of changes in cyber memory. So you can basically put somebody onto a floppy disk. Humanity has evolved in order to get to the spot where entire martial arts, for example, are reduced to floppy disk. And in Dollhouse, brain patterns can become electronic patterns that can be transferred into the brain and then wiped from the brain in order to replace them with new personalities. And so here, it seems like a lot of data to be transferred via a dish over phone lines. It suggests to me that there must be a lot of, and this was the time of dial-up internet. This was before fiber optic and all of that.
Yeah, they've got a bandwidth problem here.
Yeah, we've got a bandwidth problem. And so, it's just curious to me and curious what's actually going on. And anyway, that's we can flag that and come back to that.
Another thing is when they're looking at the screen that allegedly contains the entire Matrix, and Cypher's like, oh yeah, I see a blonde, brunette, redhead. There's billions of people in the Matrix. Can you really look at a screen and identify a single person?
Oh, well, I think it was more a matter of what the code is clearly broader and deeper and has many more layers than that. And you see it in kind of the opening sequence of the next film. And then
so he's only looking at a snapshot.
Yeah, he's looking at a very highly focused and specific part of the Matrix. And what I actually found weird was the fact that he was having a conversation from within the Matrix without having somebody else jack him in and out, which led me to suppose that probably he programmed a simulation of himself. Like he had,
it was like from his side, it was like a chat interface. For the agents, it looked like they were at a restaurant. But he was eating that steak. He wouldn't eat that steak if it was just in a chat interface.
Oh, you're right. And he was making a big point of this steak is delicious.
Type like eat steak.
and you know, he was really being visceral with it. He was like, I know that the Matrix is telling my brain this, but it's real. It tastes real. And ignorance is bliss. And the whole point of that line is if he's really there in the Matrix. So maybe, I don't know, maybe he convinced somebody to jack him into the Matrix, and put some kind of block on them being able to see where he was. We see later on in the end of the second film and the beginning of the third that they can't find Neo. So maybe he worked out with the agents to set up a blind so he would look like he was doing something and he wasn't doing like he was invisible and doing what he was doing. That's what I want to see, or what I want to believe here.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some thing there. I don't see it as a Matrix plot hole.
Yeah, it's not the worst. I thought it was interesting and ironic that it seemed to me that Neo was selling illegal VR, software within a whole realm that is VR. I mean, it's this weird kind of bizarre irony. And Simulacra and Simulation. Do you know anything about Baudrillard? Have you studied any Baudrillard?
Yeah, I haven't read him, but I've read about him.
Yeah, so I mean, within his concept, we're 4 layers removed from reality. Like we have, through the media, things are mimicking other things that are ultimately mimicking some sort of reality that we can never get in touch with. And my friend Justin famously would always say, The Matrix is exactly the film that The Matrix would want you to watch if The Matrix were real. And
well, that's part of the protocol of the one, right?
What's that? Part
of the protocol of the one.
Well, to make you believe that you could leave the Matrix when in fact you aren't able to, was his point. I think from the protocol of the one, yeah, they would want you to believe that you had that special power so that you would go and exercise it and feed into the protocol of the one. But for him, it was more that the experience of liberation itself is just a simulation that plays into deeper constraint, deeper slavery. And then I really like Neo, afraid of heights and walking on the edge of the building ledge at one point early on in the film, like when he's on the phone with Morpheus. Compare that with later on when he's walking blind on this ephemeral spirit substance in Revolutions. Like all he can see is that there's yellow stuff that's maybe unfamiliar to him that he's walking on as he's walking through the machine city. So he's come a long way in his willingness to have faith in spirit and what's going on around him. I thought it was a funny and an odd usage, two odd usages. When he says IRS D-base, the D-base, man, you broke into the D-base, and then Agent Smith talks about computer crime. You've committed virtually every computer crime we have a law for. I was like, so they hadn't come up with the word cyber crimes yet, apparently, or it hadn't caught on. And the way that I viewed Agent Smith's initial interview with Neo is that Agent Smith was unwittingly acting as an initiator or a tester of Neo to make sure his program, so to speak, like Neo's not a program himself, but was making sure that Neo was running optimally enough to be the one. Like Agent Smith consciously is there to try to catch Neo and to try to catch Morpheus, and that's the game that he's been assigned by the architect. But in reality, and part of why we see this bank of computer screens on which Neo is repeated, which we see again in The Matrix Reloaded, is, and we learn later is the view of the architect, is because Agent Smith is testing him. He needs to confirm, the Matrix, basically via Agent Smith, needs to confirm that Neo is sufficiently resilient in his resistance to the Matrix to serve to be vehicle for the protocol of the One, because he is still a human. He is still, born in one of those pods, just like every other human that's being used by the Matrix. And like his actual willingness to resist the Matrix has to be extremely high. And so that they, the Matrix may have this protocol of the One, but the way that it works is it picks a certain number of people or something, and whoever's got the highest resistance quotient becomes the One. And they get activated through eating a cookie by the Oracle, I think. So that's just my theory. We'll get to that. And I appreciated the action of the camera throughout this whole viewing of the film. There's a whole commentary just to be done on mise-en shot, the way the film was shot, and what it's looking at, and all of that. This was really delightful to me. When Morpheus is saying, there's something wrong with the world. You know it, but you can't explain. It's like a splinter in your mind. And you know what I thought? I thought that's pretty much a description. I thought it's pretty much a description of your life. I mean, that's what you wake up into every morning, right?
Pretty much.
I'm so sorry. I'm so kidding. That would be horrific. I mean, want that. Can you hear me?
People live like that. Yep.
Oh, yeah. Those people need liberation, clearly. I'm curious how the Pale Trace program was invented or discovered. Maybe it was given to them by the Oracle, that thing that they do to Neo. Exploit. It's a what?
It's a compromised exploit.
Oh, what does that mean?
It's an exploit that you think you're using to break into a machine, but that exploit's actually been compromised by the adversary. So you think you're breaking in, but you're actually doing something that you don't realize you're doing when you use it.
Oh. So you think you're hacking, but you're not.
Yeah. Like you think you found a vulnerability, but actually it's a trap that was set by the adversary. And when you use that exploit, it's going to send out certain signals that they can detect and manipulate in order to, make you into a messiah, maybe.
I also had a concern around there. I loved this is not that concern, but I did love Morpheus' sunglasses. I really want those sunglasses. They're just so cool. There was a question for me as to whether or not this was a legitimate situation of meaningful and comprehensive consent when Neo takes the red pill. He says, all I'm offering you is the truth, nothing more. And he doesn't talk at all about the existential, psychological, or ethical consequences of knowing the truth.
Yeah. You think the ethics review board might have some trouble with this?
I just think that, when Cypher later on says, if I'd known what the red pill meant, I would have told him to cram it up his ass, right? I feel like that's actually kind of a legitimate response to being shafted by the lack of full knowledge and deliberate consent. And there's no real way that Morpheus can actually give that. He can't convey.
I think he conveyed it, though, just the way he was talking, the lightning in the background, the storm, the way the whole room was set up. You knew something serious was going on. Neo knew that when he took that pill, there's going to be no connection to his previous life. He had informed consent. I think this was not.
One interpretation of the whole movie after that is that it's just one big drug trip. Really makes everything kind of boring and uninteresting, but that's one that's out there. It's also an interesting ethical question, and this might be the sort of vibrating mental core of the film. Can one actually meaningfully consent to having their personal reality upended. Like, if you, so this was an issue in One Taste and in Landmark. Like, when they're upselling somebody to another course, the person that they're speaking to does not exist in the brain that is being spoken to yet. They're speaking to the you that you could be after the training. They're speaking to the you that's possible once you've achieved all these powers and abilities through the next course. And I used to think, oh man, they really hard sell you. They really upsell you strongly. And, you know, I used to be uncomfortable with that. I used to feel like, all right, I've got to defend myself from the fact that this transformational corporation is going to make sure that I know that there's another course and is going to get everybody who's around me, who I've bonded with, who I love, to try to convince me to buy this next course. And the problem is, so this is seen from two angles. One, I can't fully choose because I can't conceive of within my current neural patterns what it would look like to be the me that I am once I've had this expansion. Like, I can't, Neo could not have contained the concept of what it meant. You saw how hard it was, how difficult it was for him to absorb the knowledge of the fact that everything he had thought was real was fake. Like, he vomits, he's like depressed, he's in denial. I mean, it was very difficult for him. And so, you know, that experience, I don't think the mind as is has the meaningful capacity to consent to. And from the other side, like, there's a certain extent, and I saw this in being in sales for Landmark, and then also being on the inside of sales for One Taste a little bit, which is another transformational company, is like they have to stand for the possibility of you. They have to hold open a space where they strongly invite you to choose something that you might not actually even be capable of choosing on your own yet. So I like to see Neo in that same way. He's contributing a whole new world, a whole new future, a whole new set of capacities that Neo would not have been capable of had he not made that choice. And really, the protocol of the One is implemented through individual people. And I think the Oracle does legitimately read his palm and investigate him to see if he's suitable as a candidate for the One. They say here, you can sit here with the other potentials, right, as he enters that room. And one of them bends a spoon with his mind, which shows that he clearly has the capacity. And what she says is, well, you've got the gift, but you're waiting to use it. And he makes this assumption that he's not the One. He makes this, and she tells him exactly what he needs to hear, which is this really great concept from Thelemic initiatory lore called the lie of your grade. So you'll get a Minerval or a first-degree initiation, and you'll be led into a certain series of perceptions, a certain series of emphases and beliefs. This is the lie you need to believe in order to have the full experience at that level of consciousness, at that level of awareness. And so she allows him, she doesn't actually ever tell him, which I really liked. I thought that was extremely elegant. She doesn't ever tell him that he's not the One. She lets him choose to believe for himself that he's not, so that he will stumble into a situation where he discovers that he actually is. And so anyway, I felt like, what do you think about all that? What do you think?
In terms of the Oracle and how she reads him?
Yeah.
I guess I got sort of stuck on the idea of the potentials.
Really?
I mean, isn't that a really great expression of, you know, what it is to be the One? You're becoming a being of infinite potential.
Yeah, you're no longer limited. You're no longer limited by any of the illusions.
Well, when you become the One, the potential is realized. Before you are the One, you're just a potential. You're not, you know, a realized thing yet.
Yeah, you know, I feel like the cookie is the thing that actually activates his full potential.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think that. Like, it is a series of drug trips. He takes the pills, then he eats the cookie.
I mean, like, yeah.
What happens if you eat the cookie before you take the pills?
I don't know. We didn't get that movie. We got this one.
I got a.
Go ahead.
I have one more point about how what is it exactly that the Matrix is getting out of people? Why are they putting people into this?
Oh, I have an idea.
I don't buy that it's for energy. That's stupid.
I have an idea.
Yeah?
So, and I think this is actually in the behind-the-scenes stuff, but it was too complicated for them to use, was this idea that the humans in the Matrix are actually pieces of a neural network. And that Morpheus Morpheus doesn't know for sure what the machines need the humans for.
I told you that.
He's just giving his own theory. So
we already had this conversation.
Yeah, I think this was like 5 years ago or something.
Morpheus says it's for energy. And, it's in line with the idea that the demiurge is feeding off for energy.
Actually, I think Morpheus doesn't think it's for energy. He thinks it's for the specific production of Duracell batteries.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it when he holds up the battery there. But if they wanted
and he turns it around very carefully. Yeah.
If they wanted to push the idea that this was humans in a big neural network, he should have just held up a computer chip there to turn humans into this. And then he holds up a, NVIDIA GPU for running neural networks.
Well, that's not as scary. That's actually kind of difficult to understand.
No.
Which is why it ended up the way that it ended up, of course.
It's also pretty funny that there's that little bit of product placement there. It's really quite ironic, right? Because product placement is part of the matrix's control that we live in the real world.
Yeah,
for you. This product placement. That's actually what ads are trying to do. Isn't that actually true? Like fashion ads, they're trying to make you wear their thing so you'll advertise their thing.
Well, they're trying to turn you into a living embodiment of the meme that they are. Richard, would you believe it? I actually investigated producing an Empowering Austin Now t-shirt not more than a week ago.
Yeah?
Yeah, so I'm part of the problem.
No, it's not a problem. This is what life is. Life is a mimetic system. It's not just because you're making money off it, it's not evil. Why would that be evil?
I rescind cancel clear my earlier comments. I was joking, really. So I think they're using the human brain for computation. And that's what computers find hard now. What computers find hard now is tasks that are easy for people. Things like operating lots of muscles at the same time. Things like riding a bike. These things turned out things like chess were really easy for computers. Turns out things like identifying whether a picture contains a bird is impossibly difficult for computers. And the only way to do it is to train them to mimic humans. So, yeah, I think they're using the human brains as computation in the Matrix. What they're doing is they've got some computational problem the machines need to solve to run their city or whatever. Yeah, the real question is what that is.
They compile their problem into some life problem for someone in the Matrix to solve. And then when the person in the Matrix solves it, they harvest the solution. Actually, I think probably a lot of what the computational power of the Matrix is used for is generating the Matrix itself. Think about the graphics processes you need to produce that simulation, right? I think a lot of those brains are doing is creating the illusion that the other brains live in. No, that's good. That's some good stuff.
Yeah, interestingly enough, they are the hard disk space needed in order for the production of the virtual reality of the Matrix. That's a good candidate. I mean, the whole ultimate agenda of the AI, as we'll see in the future couple films, is really fascinating and interesting to me. I mean, just what they're about, what they would be about if they were freed from the Matrix or after they get freed from the Matrix, which, there's this scene in Revolutions where the architect walks up to the Oracle and you get this sense, and actually it carries into the Matrix Online, which was my great missed opportunity of my youth, which was Morpheus dies and Morpheus's body is carried different places and then there are fragments of the one everywhere, and I would totally pay for it if somebody set up that MMORPG again. Steve played it for a while. It was really good. And it continues the story of the Matrix in somewhat interesting directions. But in any case, back to this film, I like this whole idea of don't think you are, know you are. This is how our reality is actually created in real life. It's through agreement with stories that don't start with us. And in order to be maximally empowered, we need to create new stories. I know that I can have everything that I want in this life. And, it's only resignation, cynicism, and a certain kind of insidious obsession with realism, quote unquote, that has people submit, surrender, and subserve certain apparent realities, quote unquote. Like, I can't have what I want, or that won't work for me, quote unquote. It works really well from a coaching standpoint. And this other concept of free your mind, and your mind makes it real. Like, there's a lot that's true about those notions when it comes to personal empowerment and personal transformation. So, and the idea of there being no spoon. That is actually physiologically, neurologically true. And I'm sure you remember, like, when we see a spoon, the spoon does not exist. The spoon is the story that our brain was trained by culture and language instantiated in our brain to tell about the spoon. Now, the spoon also comes from a culture that designs spoons based on that same notion. However, there is no doorknob. There is no couch. There is no anything.
Anything how about there is no sun?
I think that exists.
Sun, even if it didn't have a culture.
I think it exists independent of our minds and independent of our words about it, probably. And so maybe the limitation on this thing is that.
What about there is no food? I think even the animals know about food.
Okay, well maybe there are significant distinctions. It exists objectively in physical reality before and without us needing to have a concept for it.
I think about that like social and physical reality are just two different levels of constraint. Right. They're both systems of constraint. They both constrain your possible experience, essentially. The physical constraints are actually, vastly less than we think they are. Most of the constraints we actually live under are social constraints, which appear to be real, and that's what the Matrix is.
Yes. And I think the argument of the Matrix is implicitly not just that the social constraints and the mental constraints are things that we can transcend, but also physical constraints on some level.
Very possible. Very possible.
This is more of
not only possible, but probable.
Well, especially if we're living in Elon Musk's simulation. But I don't want to push that too hard. Humans have their limiting beliefs about themselves, and they need initiatory experiences to provoke their potential from them into action. And she says, you've got the gift, but it looks like you're waiting for something. And this provocation for Neo is to the self-sacrifice of his life for Morpheus's, which is paradoxically the same as the dissolution of the self through releasing stories and also the limited concept of the self itself. Like Neo, he traverses this ladder, this stair-step ladder. He starts with no belief in his own oneness, so to speak, the oneness. And then he says to Trinity, I believe I can get Morpheus out. And so that belief is kind of his stair step into this belief that he has the power to do anything. Like, once he believes he can get Morpheus out, they actually rescue Morpheus. And right after the moment when Morpheus gets rescued, that's when and this is what I thought of the shimmering wave that travels through the building as the helicopter explodes, was that was Neo realizing his control over the Matrix, which is why Trinity and Morpheus are in awe, because Morpheus actually redirects the energy of the explosion into the wave that moves along the sides of the building in order to save Trinity. And I thought that was just, beautiful that he did that. I thought, like for the longest time, I never understood, why is there a frickin' wave? What's actually even going on here? I don't know. But he owns his own power, and you can also see how turned on she is when she gets pulled back up. Like, something that was always brewing in her has now been intensified. Her love is very interesting, by the way. So it's not just sexual. We know that it's very sexual from the next film. People argue that her love seems to come from nowhere. It seems to be muted and unexpressed and just kind of weird. And it doesn't become apparent until later in the film, and there it just seems to come from nothing when he's saying, I love you, or when she's saying, I love you, and come back to life, basically. But, the Oracle told her she'd fall in love with the one, and her knowingness accords directly and specifically with the Oracle's definition of love, which, okay, so let's look at it within the Matrix, love can mean whatever the machines say it means. And it can be whatever common experience they program the humans to have. So one level of reading this is to say her experience of love, it accords exactly with what the Oracle says and exactly with what the Matrix machine programmed human culture taught her. However, I think that there's this sense of her falling for Neo before she could even say it to him, and you see her resistance because, like, maybe for her, love exists as this new kind of constraint. Like, it's this delicious feeling and experience, but she doesn't want to be constrained by it given the mission of the resistance. And so that was my take on what's going on in her character. When she's standing there in the subway about to tell him and has ample time to tell him, it's a 3-syllable sentence, I love you. And she doesn't say it. It's because, like, she doesn't want to be controlled by what may even occur for her in that moment as another program, right? Like, this susceptibility to this thing. And that's actually her way of knowing who the one is. And actually the system's way, maybe she was given a cookie that programmed her to fall in love with the one. And maybe there's something written into the code of how Trinity exists that allows her to uniquely detect the one. Or maybe, as Cornel West and Ken Wilber argue, the enlightenment of the world always happens with Neo and Trinity together. And what that means is, like, he can't do it without her. And he does it with her help. And so maybe they're both the one on some level or in some sense. And then there's another YouTube video where they talk about Agent Smith is actually the one. So there's a lot of different views here. But, like, if she hadn't called him back into consciousness and said, hey, I love you, get up, maybe he wouldn't have activated the full power and potential of being the one for himself. Maybe she needed to be the what? Yeah. So her love is, I think, kind of maybe a program, or I don't know. So anyway, I like, just to go back a little bit, there seem to be a lot of abandoned buildings with functioning phones, huh?
That's just, LA is like that.
It was LA. Yes, it was filmed in Sydney. So I figured the Resistance set those phones up. Like, their exploit actually created the existence of those phones in those places, in the Matrix, and they're continually, like, there's got to be one ship whose job is, like the Nebuchadnezzar, to go into the Matrix and reconfigure safe areas for them to plug in and then leave. And so that made sense to me. It made sense also that Neo used, you said this earlier, you can mean whatever you want to mean when you say deja vu. It made sense to me that Neo uses their concept deja vu. I assume that they trained him on how to use that phrase, but they didn't tell him what it meant. They just told him, all right, so this is what we mean by deja vu. And so he looked and he was like, oh, it was deja vu. And they're all like, oh, shit, it was a deja vu. Because they know that it means something bad. They just didn't want to scare him or something. So there's a lot of great moments. Tank was a great character. Agent Smith saying humans define their reality through misery and suffering. I thought that was...
Smith's monologue is great.
Yeah, his whole thing about humans being viruses, I thought that was fascinating. And there's this scene, this classic moment. So there's several moments in this film, like the running up the wall. I did that all throughout my adolescence. Not in the same way that Trinity does, but I would run along the wall because I always felt like it made me look cool. And hell, I actually dressed as Neo for that dance, remember?
I do. There's photographs of that.
There's photographs somewhere on the internet of me dressing as Neo for the LSMSA, like, prom or something. And then you and Rebecca next to me?
Yeah.
Like, looking serious. You were in your freaking orange shirt.
Yeah. Classic.
It's classic. It exists somewhere. I just wish I'd choose to find it someday.
Somewhere. I've got that photo somewhere on my computer.
So that was like one of the classic moments of me in relationship to this film. And then there's this other one where I think her name is Switch, the white-haired chick. She realizes she's about to... Yeah,
Not like
she
this.
said, not like this, not like this. And
Then she dies.
and then she dies. And on some level, well, okay, so one day I was for about a month in 2009, leading up to the time when I had eye surgery. I was a dishwasher at Applebee's. I would work from about 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. washing dishes. And eventually I marched in one Sunday morning to do food prep, and I started prepping food, and then I looked at my manager and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I just walked out. I walked the fuck out of there because
nice. Must have been good.
Well, it did. And my experience of working at Applebee's was kind of like that scene. Like moment by moment, what was repeating in my head was this experience of not like this, not like this. Like, so, on some level, the key for us all is to have a death that is not like that. Like where we feel complete in the meaning that we've created over the course of our lives, and we feel satisfied with maybe the actual circumstance of how we're dying, and by extension, having a life that is satisfying in that same way.
Yes, to die a heroic death.
To die a heroic death rather than just being plugged. Hard to do. Well, one can live one's life heroically. I highly recommend the new Spider-Man film for some thoughts on that. Extraordinary. So I've got to do our classic moment of compassion, even though this isn't Star Trek. When you can see Tank is suffering from his brother being dead, that's when I teared up. When Trinity looks at him and is like, so what about Dozer? And he just kind of looks down. I was just like, oh. And there's this other thing. Smith says, billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious. And I thought, that's really, for me, what it means to me to be a coach is to wake people up to their potential, to what's possible, and to the illusions themselves. Like, there's never not going to be a market for what I do, given that people live in constant illusion on many levels. Self-delusion is the biggest one. So that's my perception and appreciation of that. I loved, what did you think about this scene where he says, would you please remove any metallic items you're carrying, coins, loose change? Holy shit.
That whole scene is great. And one thing I love about that scene is how physical it is. That's something that the movie emphasizes again and again in the fight scenes, like that really brutal fight scene with Morpheus in the bathroom. It's so physical, and yet you're thinking this is a simulation. It's very cool.
Yeah, a simulation of embodiment. It's a really powerful simulation of embodiment. What I found to be curious the first couple times I watched this movie was like, okay, so those people, they're part of the Matrix, but they're still people. They're still humans. And so I felt kind of unethical about him just randomly killing people in order to get to Morpheus. And then I realized, it's a symbol of us disappearing and releasing sites of resistance to our new belief or our chief aim, which in his case, his new belief is that he can save Morpheus. And these are maybe symbols within his own mind. So at least we've got the symbolic level. We can make sense of it. Ethically, Ethically, I don't really have an answer. I mean, maybe there is.
Ethically, I honestly don't care, but I mean, why is it that so many movements often will involve this notion of unreality, that the world outside of the movement is somehow unreal? Because it gives people moral license in their minds to do things like kill. So there's something interesting there.
Which is then the danger of that, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
So it's something to notice. The gun battle was really beautiful, though. It's one of the most beautifully depicted action scenes I've ever witnessed, as is the bomb explosion afterwards. And then there's this progression, right, which reminded me of being a coach and a healer. You start by sorting yourself out just enough to help another person to make a profound difference in their life, and then that gives you feedback to where you're available for more people. And what I mean by that is, back to this stair-stepping thing that Neo does, he gets enough faith in himself to save Morpheus, and then he builds faith through saving Trinity, by bending the rules of the world. And then he starts to believe he can take on the agent. Then he starts to believe that he can bring himself back from the dead. Then he starts to believe he can imbibe an agent, and then the agents run, right? So it's this realm of empowering yourself through letting go of your limiting beliefs that I speak to or come from. It's a stair-step process. It's not necessarily like I'm going to start here and then I'm going to suddenly believe that I can do anything. And then there were some more things that I really appreciated. I'll just run through them near the end of the film. Neo spends much of the later trilogy resisting the death of Trinity. And he's unwilling to let her go and surrender to his own feminine, his own flow. And once he does, his ability to give himself fully to source energy is there. You see this in the last film. And so he develops an attachment to Trinity. So you may be enlightened, but you still have the capacity for attachment. He may see through the illusion of the mind and to some extent of his own self, but that doesn't mean he isn't subject to still living within human traps and attachments and delusions. And there's this really cool mystical Western aspect that I really enjoyed of the little paper blowing across the screen as Neo and Agent Smith begin their final their confrontation in the subway. There was like the sounds of the Western. I really appreciated that. Did you ever see El Topo?
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of that, like some Jodorowsky stuff. And I like the classic Buddhist when they both have their guns to each other's heads and they say, "You're empty. So are you." Anatta. It's anatta. No. There's no self. And this whole notion of the artificial intelligences in the Matrix actually being on a path to enlightenment that needs to include the machines and the humans, that's fascinating to me. That's really like delightful and interesting and curious. And it's kind of implied there. And I like that the film returns in the end to the heart of the city, or one might say Neo's own heart, but everything is bright as Neo's heart has definitively opened. It is daytime now when they return to that same building. And so I thought, the point of the film is really to get Neo into his heart where he's willing to receive love from Source through Trinity and thus activate his own superpowers, his own capacity to contribute at a much higher level to the people around him. And that's what he turns around and does is according to the Animatrix and the Matrix Reloaded, they are freeing minds. That's mainly what they're doing afterwards, kind of a bodhisattva thing. And then have you ever read Being in Time, Richard, by Heidegger?
No, have you?
Most of it, maybe half to two-thirds. It's really good, and it's really entertaining, and it's really intricate.
It's pretty dense.
He says that the thing, so he says basically the being that we are in the world is a being that is an issue or a being that is in question. And the way that we resolve the question of the being that we are is owning it in the face of death. And so the thing that forecloses Dasein being there is, this experience of knowing that you're going to face your own death. What do you choose to do with your life? What do you choose? Who do you choose to be? And so there's this really beautiful depiction of this whole notion when Agent Smith says, "Hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability. That is the sound of your death." As he's holding him there and he's about to get hit by a subway train. And I thought this was such a great representation of the moment where you own who you are in the face of death that Heidegger talks about. Confronted with that, Thomas Anderson speaks into existence, I think for the first time from within the Matrix, he says, "My name is Neo." And at one and the same time, he's creating who he is for himself. He's creating who he is for the world. He's creating his connection to Source, monism. I am the one, right? Implicitly, Neo is walking a path of enlightenment that represents us all. We are connected to this being or this field of possibility that actually is us, and so long as we carry a distinction between us and it, we are suffering because of that. And so the point is to reconnect into that. And ironically enough, this whole freeing himself from the Matrix is kind of could be seen as a detour into a certain way of like relating to this whole process that he then resolves his at oddsness with eventually through surrendering completely to the machines. And the machines integrate him into themselves by this fact of the change of their lights from red to green. At the very end, they're carrying his body as if on a funeral bier, and the light is green. And then you also see this in the Animatrix when the humans capture a little animal machine and they convert it into a machine usable by them through their own form of matrix, and its light turns green. So there's this symbolic transition later on. But anyway, after I've already talked about what happens. I'm almost done with my notes. There's almost, I like this, and I'm curious if you noticed it, there's almost respect in Agent Smith's voice when he says, "Goodbye, Mr. Anderson."
Yeah.
It didn't sound so much like gloating.
It alternates between respect and contempt.
Yeah, his character is really fascinating. And then here's the one that you might want to use for our screen cap. Right after Morpheus and Tank think that Neo is dead, the looks on their faces, man, were just so depressed and sad and hilarious.
Yeah,
like
it was a bit of overacting there, I think.
yeah, and so I mean, I actually would much prefer that scene where Neo sees the code of the Matrix. That's a much better front-facing for us as Clever Orbits. But maybe you could include that other one at the end of the video.
Yeah.
So, you know, Neo imbibes and consumes Smith. He embodies the highest expression of all the powers available in the agents, the most powerful beings in this mind realm. And the way that this movie ends, this subtle scene between Neo and Trinity followed by his explosion onto the world is just fantastic. It's subtle enough to leave you with a lot of good questions, like what does he actually do between the first and second films? And then there's this other experience of like, imagine, you know, you're just walking down the street in New York or something, and you see a guy walk out of a telephone booth, and then he just fucking flies away. Like, that's awesome. I mean, it looks sort of less exciting as depicted in the film than it would from the perspective of being in the Matrix, seeing it happen. I mean, like, if I saw somebody do that, and that's kind of, if you were to take a snapshot of the film, if you were to take 5 seconds of the film and have it be the synecdochic representation for the whole, it would be that scene where he looks around and then he puts his sunglasses on to kind of affirm his realization of the illusion that he's participating in, whether it be the illusion of the self or social constraint or physical body, whatever. And then he just takes off. He just flies away. Like, that to me is beautiful. That to me is elegant, especially with the music, especially with his monologue, especially with that scene where system error, like that's so cool. And this film, you know, it's an elegant, beautiful, complete story unto itself. And you know, to come finally to the end of this, I give it a 10 out of 10. And the questions I ask myself are, is there anything missing from this film? No. Is there anything wrong with it as it is? No. Is it an epic, wonderful, beautiful, satisfying, fulfilling, both in the watch and always in the rewatch film? Yes. And, you know, it's also, I would argue, a great first chapter in a larger and longer story. And, I mean, you get this very classically simplistic, dualistic story here, but you get something much more intricate and complicated and fascinating in the next two films. And they build on this, and they're implicit here from the very start. So, you know, Richard, back to you. This is, I'm curious about your rating and if you have anything else left.
Oh, it's a 10 out of 10, man. Come on. I mean, look, okay, so I can't think of here's the only criticism I can think of for this movie. It's in terms of its structure. it very closely follows the conventional Hollywood script structure, where, the way Hollywood movies work is it's always the following. There's always a hero. Something's preventing him from being what he wants to be. At 30 minutes, he gets what he wants. At 60 minutes, he loses it and has to fight and give up everything to get it back. At 90 minutes, he gets it back. The movie's over. Matrix follows that perfectly down to the minute. But, part of the point of the movie is that, these conventions and cliches like movie conventions are part of this system of control that we live in. And so the movie sort of has an inbuilt mechanism for avoiding any possible criticism.
I think I missed that. I think that was so subtle as to escape me. If you could restate it.
Yeah, so the movie is conventional in a number of ways, but I don't think that's a problem, because part of what the movie is talking about is how the systems of conventions that we live in, like the fact that we all walk one way on the street, are part of the system of control that we need to be aware of and break free of, possibly.
Oh, it's a self-parody on some level.
Yeah, exactly. So any criticism of the movie, you can just say, oh, well, it's being ironic. Same with like the product placement with Morpheus and the Duracell battery, right? Anyway, that's not a real criticism. I love this movie. That's not an actual problem. The fact that it follows the formula, that makes it good, man. So I have one final comment.
Yes,
I really enjoyed the line where Smith said, "Never send a human to do a machine's job." I was trying to think, how can I incorporate this line into my daily life as something I just say?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm so curious. I'm sure you will find a way. So,
I'm trying to think of some way to use it that implies that I am the machine. Maybe if one of my students doesn't do something right, I'll just say, "Never send a human to do a machine's job," and then do it myself.
Even more terrifying. Yeah, that's the other thing, is like the untrammeled potential of machines. Like, there's this sense throughout all the films, and I'll end with this. This film series is anticipating problems that we don't actually really know how to theorize yet. Namely, what would it be like for artificial intelligence both to exist and to have a mind of its own and to coexist with humanity, right? And, like, what would it want to do? And how would our coexistence be mutually limitative? And how could we participate in a mutually beneficial uplifting and unleashing of our mutual potential rather than competing? As you see in the Second Renaissance, which is this really horrific, but has just such great music that I always used to drive really fast, scenes of the humans trying to eliminate artificial intelligence and kill off all the machines. Like, there's this fear of things that we don't understand. And that fear leads humans to try to dominate the artificial intelligence. And then the artificial intelligence...
I wouldn't know how that's happened. I guess Animatrix is canon, but it seems equally likely to me that humans will be hostile and that AI will be hostile. Humans are like the least hostile of all the animals, of at least all predator animals, right?
We're the most hostile?
We're the least hostile of all predator animals. Like, we're biologically predator animals. We're set up to kill other animals, right? We're carnivores. We're much less violent than chimps, which are our nearest evolutionary neighbors. This idea that humans are, like, inordinately violent. Anyway, that's a whole other point for another time.
Yeah, whether or not we are inherently violent or violent to an insane degree or an intense degree or whatever. These are all great questions.
I think the interesting question with AI is, it's just going to be such an alien thing, and we might react to it in a hostile way. Maybe we should react to it in a hostile way. We don't know. That's the unsettling thing about it. It's really a true alien thing, the singularity. We can't even imagine what it would be like.
Yeah, well, I think in that respect, these films are actually good in that they showcase Neo self-sacrificing himself ultimately, both for the liberation of humans and for the liberation of the machines. The machines are trapped in the Matrix so long as this cycle, like Agent Smith himself and the Merovingian and the Keymaker and all of their ilk are trapped in the Matrix when their potential, or they're trapped by their function in the Matrix, And then even Sati, the little kid in the third one, the father wants to save her from being thrown away because she no longer serves a purpose in the Matrix, the overall grand scheme of things. And so, like, this whole idea that we need to be on the lookout for self-determination as a qualifying characteristic that we allow to exist in artificial intelligence, like that to me is interesting. And it's the same sort of thing with Data, right, on Next Generation or the Doctor and Voyager. Like, these things, eventually they're going to exist. Eventually they're going to have sufficient complexity and intricacy to be sentient. And when that happens, we should maybe pay attention and grant them a certain level of compassion. Now, the real line is, well, when does the thing have that? And I don't know yet. I'm not clear on that.
Yeah. Yeah, like what does it mean? What does it feel like when you have something that's half sentient? That's the stuff. We don't even know what that would look like.
Well, if
it's another sentient thing and it looks and acts just like a human, then yeah, sure, we'll be compassionate. But if it's like somewhere halfway between a machine and a human, I don't know.
Well, if it's half sentient, the answer is clearly just to wanton kill it,
or to have compassion for it,
or to have compassion for it. Yeah,
have compassion.
Yeah, I think the air should always be on the side of compassion, and I think I think we should always orient towards the side of compassion. Which, to conclude, finally, Neo does. He aims at compassion. He sacrifices himself for Morpheus, and then he saves Trinity, and then he eventually sacrifices the whole being of his existence for the sake of other people. And there's certainly not anything bad about that. I really appreciate that. So this has been The Matrix. This has been, I think, our longest podcast in history so far, Richard.
Could be.
No surprise there either. And please like, comment, share, subscribe, follow us. We'll be doing the rest of the Matrix trilogy and the Animatrix films. And then we're going to be returning to Discovery in January. So, Richard, thank you so much for coming on.
Always a pleasure. Never send a human to do a machine's job.